I used to really like the show Whose Line Is It Anyway? Not because like Drew Carey was on it, though Drew Carey's like pretty cool of a person. No, it was the first time I really experienced something called improv and improvisation. And it really struck me how fascinating this type of acting was. It was interesting because you had people given just the barest amount of information, and they were expected right then and there, on the fly, to come up with something that will make people laugh. And most of us, we would sit there and think, oh gosh, that's terrifying. Like, how is it I'm supposed to construct a scene? How is it I'm supposed to respond to anything if I have just the barest minimum of what it is I'm supposed to use? I think that most people would find it to be terrifying, but I loved it because I thought to myself, wow, you have to be not only really clever to come up with things, but you have to be quick in it too, because if you're ever doing plays or comedy or things like that, dead air is not something people want to hear. They want to be entertained, and so you have a short amount of time to make something out of virtually nothing. And to me, that really speaks of how life kind of operates, how life kind of works at times. You know, we've all had situations where we need one specific tool, right? We need one specific thing so that we can accomplish something. Now, I can sometimes get away with not having a Phillips screwdriver if I have sort of a very specific flathead screwdriver. And sometimes I'm able to use like a butter knife or something if I can't find the right screwdriver. Improv. But oftentimes when those situations come up and we're like, no, I need this one specific thing, we're missing out on a couple other things that are going on around us. We're missing out on the fact that we do have talents. We do have things that we can use instead of what it is we want to use. For example, you don't have the right screwdriver. You have a voice. Call up your neighbor, call up your buddy, tell them, hey, I need this kind of screwdriver. Do you have one? What was the old thing people used to do? I'm baking and I'm out of sugar. Go ask our neighbor for a cup of sugar. See, we already do improv work, and we already are adept at taking the things that we have and utilizing them in a different way. And I think that that's an important thing for us to remember. Even if we don't have what it is we think we need, and I'm going to use that word think we need because, again, you make the best of what you have. Even when we don't have what we think we need, we have what we have. We have things that we can use just maybe in a slightly different way. It's not like having 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. You still have a bowl and you can tip the soup in your hand if you absolutely have to. We have things that we can use. And when we miss sight of that fact, we tend to have sort of this lack of self-confidence and this lack of gratitude in our hearts. I don't particularly need to have $1 million. It would be wonderful if I did. If I was a multimillionaire or whatever, I know exactly what I would do with it. Now, that being said, do I need it? No. I have what it is that I need, and I do what I need to do with what I already have. And see, it's those moments where we stop and we think about what we already have, the blessings that God has already given us, that we find that we are truly very richly blessed beyond measure. An attitude of gratitude, if you will. I mean, I get it, because it's not great to need something that you don't have, or at least have something that in general you want to use. But every challenge that we have, every time we don't have the right tool or the cup of sugar, it helps us to stop and reflect on what it is we do have, the resources and the blessings that we have that are available to us. And maybe in those times, we already have what it is that we need. Our reading from Joshua this morning starts with a reflection. Now, I don't believe that God operates in a vacuum. I don't believe very much in coincidences. And so when the people enter into the land that God promised to Abraham, it is time for them to celebrate the Passover meal. This is a very important festival, a very important meal of remembrance. It helps the people to remember what it is that has happened to them up to this point. You know, the whole thing actually kind of started with Joseph, and when he went to Egypt, and the people came because of the famine, and they grew in number and populous. And so naturally, some Pharaoh decides to look at them and say, they're making me uneasy. Let's enslave them so they don't rise up against me. And so the people then become enslaved. Well, that's not very awesome. And so God then sends Moses to free the people. And the people are freed. But not only that, as they are led out of Egypt, they are led by the very presence of God. Now, of course, people being people, they grumble and they complain and they bemoan, oh, we should have went back there. We're hungry. We're tired. We're going to die. And so what is it that God does next? Well, he's got Moses running around hitting rocks with a stick so that they can have fresh water. And he's sending quails at night and manna in the morning. God is providing for the people. And so they go through 40 years wandering through the desert, and it's not because they're lost or anything, but it's because God is working through this situation. See, God needs a generation of people that are just a little bit different. Because the very next thing that they do after they get to the land, this begins the conquest narrative. This is when they start the campaign to take over the land that they were promised. And this leads us to this moment in Joseph where the people are standing there celebrating the Passover. And as they celebrate this, they're remembering. They're remembering how they got to where they are. They're remembering how it is that God brought them to this moment. And something really interesting happens. You see, it's the first time in the land. And what do they do in the land? The land flowing with milk and honey, as it were. A land said to be bountiful and prosperous. And when they get into the land, they're eating the fruit of the land. And so what happens next is that God says, awesome. You guys are here. You don't need the manna anymore. Now, I don't know how the reaction to that was. I think that it could have very well been, this was really easy to just go out and collect the manna, and now I'm going to have to, do a lot more work. I'm going to have to plant seeds, and I'm going to have to get fertilizer, and all this stuff I need to make stuff grow. So why would God do that? Did the people make God angry again or something? No, it was because they had what they needed. You see, God provides what it is we need in a given situation. We just have to stop and think about it. The people through the desert, they needed the manna. They needed the quail, but now they're home. So why would they need the manna anymore? They have more than enough time now to settle in the land, to make the land theirs, and till the land, to work the land, and to create a home. They are not going to be a nomadic people from this point on, so they don't need takeout food. Instead, they can sit in their land. I think that's why this story, the conquest narrative, begins really with the Passover feast. It's a way of us saying, this is where we've been. And this is where we're going. And that's the great thing. We call it hindsight. And we say, hindsight's always 20/20, which used to confuse me as a kid. But I get it now. It means hindsight is perfect sight. Because you can look backwards and say, okay, that makes sense. I see how things line up now. I can see how it was that things worked to get me to be where it is I am supposed to be right this second. I can see it in my life. I'm sure that if you guys sat there and reflected on your own lives, then you too would see how it is that God moved with you and through you to get you to be where you needed to be. Was it always easy? No, of course not. Hard work and dedication are never easy, and oftentimes they're not even that fun. And we think, oh, it could have been so much easier if I had hit the lottery, if I had had this, if I had that. But here's the thing. The past makes us who we are today. The past is what makes us who we are today. You would not be the same person you are right now had things played out differently. You would be different. And so when we look backwards through time and we can say, wow, in that moment, I was panicking and I was freaking out and I thought I needed this one specific thing. But it turns out what I needed was something else entirely. And when we take that and we add God to the mix, what we're saying is, wow, God might not have given me exactly what it was that I wanted, but God gave me something that I needed. This whole idea of what we want versus what we need is paired quite beautifully in the story of the prodigal son. A story we all know. It's a story that's been preached on time and time again. One of the easiest things to preach on. One of the easiest things to hear. We know it. It's been told to us in Sunday school since we were knee-high to a grasshopper's boxer shorts and all that fun stuff. And we know the story. It's a part of us. So we know what happens. We know that the younger brother jumps line and causes social havoc. Because not only is he younger, and he would have to go through his older brother first, but he says, Dad, you're no good to me alive. Because that's what an inheritance is. An inheritance is something you inherit from somebody after they have passed on. And so subtly, what he's saying without saying it is, I wish you were dead so I could have the thing that I want right now. And what is it that he wants? Money. And the dad is now shamed in the community. And the younger son is now a shameful, disgraceful person in the community. And the dad, probably brokenhearted, says, okay. He divides up his property and gives the younger son his cut of the property. And then he turns around and sells it. So now, not only is the social standing of the father and that family diminished, but the capital gains that they have made throughout the years is now diminished as well. There's a little commandment, honor thy mother and father so that you may live long in the land that I have given to you. You see, that very specifically is actually talking about burial rites. Because what people would do would basically bury grandma and grandpa and mom and dad on the property. And that marked the property as belonging to this one specific family. And now the size of this family's property has been cut probably by about a third, because it was the younger brother, and he wasn't going to get as much as the older brother. So the shame that this kid is heaping upon his family is immeasurable. And then he goes and blows it, spends it all, does all of these wild things, and winds up with nothing. And here's the thing about the moment you have nothing, is all of the people you thought were your friends, who were just using you, well, suddenly they are no longer there. And so here's this young kid who has a history of making terrible decisions, really, in a foreign land. So he's not even close to his God. He's not where he needs to be, metaphorically and literally. So he is working for someone who does not observe the same rites and rules that he does, and who has pigs, which I know pigs are gross, but they're ritually unclean animals to this kid. And he is so low, he has hit rock bottom at this point. He says, I would love to eat the scraps from those dirty, unclean animals and make myself unclean. He is willing to debase himself to that level, and it clicks in his head, and he says, this is exactly what I deserve, and he's right. He says, I am not fit to be my father's son. If I go to him and tell him this, he might let me be a slave for him. And so he resolves to do the hardest thing that any human on the earth will ever have to do and admit that he was wrong. And he knows what he did. That shame is hanging over his head. It's hanging over his family's head. And he's probably practicing this speech. And I see Dad, I'm just going to look down. Don't look him in the eye. You don't deserve to look him in the eye because you're kind of a crummy person. So you're going to look down and you're going to say, Dad, I'm sorry. I totally messed up. I'm not going to be your son anymore because I don't deserve it. If you could please just help me to be like a slave or something so I can have something, that would be wonderful. And he's just going over and over in his mind, overthinking, overanalyzing, realizing he's going to say no. He's going to say no. He has every right to say no because I've done this horrible, terrible thing to him. I've ruined my name. I've ruined my family's name. I have done these horrible things. And the dad sees him while he's walking down the road. And the dad does something shameful in this moment. Elders don't run. That was the culture. An elder gentleman in this era, in this time, would have to be more dignified, a little more respectable. Not so much fast pace and running with reckless abandon, but just sort of sauntering out there. And so he makes a spectacle of himself to his neighbors, to the community, and he runs. And as he approaches, his son's like, Dad, I'm sorry, I'm not worthy of being called your son. I've sinned against heaven and against you. And before he can say anything else, the dad just picks him up and embraces him in this hug. And he says, go get a robe, the best robe that we have. Bring a ring, bring sandals. Let's get my son dressed. And then we're going to have a party with the best food that we can. The older brother catches wind of this, and he says, that's not right. And the older brother is right. Objectively speaking, the older brother is absolutely right. None of this should be going on. Socially, that kid should be kicked out. You didn't want to be here. You're the one who left. You're the one who said you wanted me to be dead. Well, guess what now? You're dead to me, bucko. That's what the older brother expected. But instead, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand why his dad would do such a shameful thing, such a reckless, abandoning thing, and run to him. And so he sits outside being a party pooper. And he tells this story to reflect how the Pharisees and the scribes are treating the people who Jesus is eating with. The sinners, the tax collectors, the ne'er-do-wells, those people. And the dad goes to the son, and the son says, this is just crap. This is garbage. Like, I've been here. Like, you've never even given me a goat so I could party with my friends, and you killed the fatted calf. You killed that thing. We're having a feast for someone who did what they did to you. And the dad's like, yeah, I did. Because he came back. Is it what the young man deserves? No. It's not even what he wants. It's what he needs. See, what he needed was the grace of his dad. He needed his dad to love him, to be there for him. And that's what he got. No, we didn't deserve it. So that's the great thing about grace. It's not what we deserve. It's what we're given. Because that's the funny thing about God, is that regardless of who you are, regardless of where you are, God comes to us. See, that's one of the things we have to do with people. You meet the people where they are. You go to them. You meet them. And that's what God does with us. God comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Envelops us in the kind of hug and embrace that only a parental figure can give to us and says, it's okay. It's going to be okay. It's beautiful. It's not giving us what we deserve, but what we need, because the beauty of grace is that it makes life unfair. God has offered us grace. I'm grateful for that, because Lord knows I need grace. I know what I do wrong. I know when I screw up. I know how I screw up. I'm not perfect. I wish I were. But the thing about God is that it's not that God doesn't care. It's that God says, I love you. That makes it different. That gives us the forgiveness that we need. Thanks be to the God who covers a multitude of sins, who doesn't remind us of the past, but helps us to live into the glorious future with God's own self. Amen.